Welcome back to the channel, everybody. On today's video, we're going to be looking at building some doors to put on the sawmill shed, uh, hanging those doors and putting sheet metal on them. At the end of today's video, we're going to look at how much I've got tied up in the building now that I finally got it finished. So I'm trying to build these doors as strong and light as possible. I need 4 of these doors. They need to be a little over 6 feet wide and a little over 9 feet tall. So I'm building the top of them out of a 2x6 and the sides out of 2x4s. Of course, this is all lumber that I've milled myself, and it's all still rough sawn. So the way I'm joining all the lumber for these doors is making a half lap joint where I'm cutting a rabbet half of the depth of each board, overlapping them, gluing and screwing them. This chop saw has a feature on it that allows you to control the depth of cut. It's got a little piece of metal that you can flip over in front of a screw and dial in the depth that you want. You can flip it out of the way and still use it as a full depth chop saw. So I'm flipping back and forth between cutting the boards to length and cutting the depth of the rabbets in all these boards. Unlike a radial arm saw, you can't move the fence on this closer to the operator. So in order to cut the rabbet the full width of the board, you have to put a spacer in behind it to be able to cut the rabbet all the way through. The radius of the blade doesn't clear the fence unless you're cutting full depth. Then I'm taking them to the bandsaw, set the fence for half of the thickness of the board, and cutting the rest of the rabbet joint. Just as a point of interest, the 2x6s that I'm using, I cut on my old LT10 probably 8 years ago or so. The 2x4s, some of you may recognize from one of my prior videos 2 or 3 months ago. They've been air stacked and drying since, and they're down to about 12%. We're going to go ahead and use them up. So the perimeter 2x4s, I'm doing the same way. I'm cutting the length, and then I'm cutting part of the rabbet joint. Right here I'm cutting where it'll overlap the 2x6. By the next door, which isn't in this video, I decided to just take a couple of blocks of 2x4 and put kind of semi-permanent on my fence on both ends of the board. I'm starting out with it cutting the joint without the spacer in there so that I get a more accurate square cut, and then putting a little plywood shim in there right now, and that gets to be pretty tedious. So I upgrade to those blocks of 2x4 held on there with a couple of spring clamps, and that worked a lot better and more efficient, but I wasn't videoing at that point. So edited out off camera, I do have to go make multiple measurements because this is rough sawn lumber. All the dimensions aren't accurate. They vary about 1/8 of an inch. So in order to try to make these joints very accurate without planing all the lumber, I have to go measure the board where the joint is going to marry together and match it up with the joint that I'm currently cutting, and so on. The doors that I'm building are about 9'6" tall, and they're 92 inches wide, so just a little under 8 foot. There's 4 of them. They overlap on the building about 3.5 inches, and then they overlap each other about 3.5 inches, with the exception of the very center, and the 2 center ones just butt into each other head to head. These are kind of in the style of sliding barn door Usually on sliding barn door type situation, you've got two doors and they just slide together head to head. They open up full width, so each door is half of the door opening. Well, I've got a 30-foot opening. I've got a 40-foot building, so I don't want the doors sticking out like great big wings out the side when they're wide open. So I'm dividing them by 4 instead of 2. By doing that, they only stick out a couple of feet instead of several feet. Here you see I've got some of the boards dry fitted and checking them for fit. Then I'm going to flip them open, throw some glue on them, and get some screws thrown in them. I'm using Type Bond 3 glue to glue all these joints with. It's supposed to be a waterproof glue. I've got a mailbox that I glued up out of cedar using this glue probably 15 years ago. And I went and inspected the joints on it, and the joints on it are good and sound. So that's what I decided to go with on this. Hopefully this won't have all that much water on them, but they will be susceptible to a lot of humidity in Arkansas environment without any air conditioning. Here you can see I'm cross measuring this door to make sure we're good and square before I get too many screws in it and have trouble getting it racked to where I want it. Especially need to get that done before the glue starts setting. I'm using the little pieces of plastic between the doors to keep the doors from gluing themselves together. I'm just building these one on top of another, and of course I also don't want the excess glue getting on my tables either, but if I wasn't really careful without these pieces of plastic, I'd have these 4 doors all glued into one big mass. So I just cut up a few pieces of plastic and stuck in here. So there's 2 intermediate supports in these doors to support the sheet metal. And I'm not going to run the rabbets all the way across the vertical 2x4s on these, because I'm afraid that would weaken the 2x4 too much. That would get it down to where it wasn't really anything but a 1x4 where the joint is. So I'm just running the intermediate supports 1.5 inches across the vertical supports. Of course, your framing square has a 1.5 inch leg and a 2-inch leg, so I just use the 1.5 inch leg as a guide on how deep into the vertical support to put the cut. So now that I've got my layout on the vertical member, I'm going to take a wood chisel and cut that out. No, not really, but I am cutting a score in it. When I use the router to plow out this rabbet, it ends up with a lot of fuzz, and the fuzz hides your line where you can't see where you're going. But if I cut 1/8 of an inch deep on the line, the fuzz doesn't have the ability to hide the line on me. I'm using a 3/4 inch diameter bit that's right at 1 inch tall, and I'm using just about the whole thing, so I'm taking my time instead of resetting the depth. This isn't a plunge router, so I have to set the depth manually every time, so I'm just taking it nice and slow and eating the material out. I'm going to apologize ahead of time. Here in just a second, you'll see that the camera is actually sitting on the table, and when I go to using the hammer and chisel to clean up these corners, it bounces around quite a bit, but I didn't have anywhere else to put the camera. So I'm just using a 3/4 wood chisel, using a dead blow hammer. In fact, I kind of like it with a wood chisel. It works pretty well. Get these corners cleaned up here so I can get a board stuck in here and get some measurements on how to cut the rabbets to fit this joint. So now I've got all 4 2x4 joints cut just like that one. I'm going to get the 2 crosswise members laid in here and mark them. Getting a measurement real quick to make sure I'm dead on that 92 wide. Make sure I don't need to trim my crossways supports any. So now I'm just taking a pencil after I've got the board laid in here and cutting the depth on this joint, and I'm exactly half of the depth of the 2x4. So I'm actually going to remove what's sticking above the side support board. You'll see in just a second. When cutting something like this, I always like to make it real plain to myself visually what part I'm supposed to be cutting out and throwing away, so I don't accidentally cut the wrong part out. Because these are right down the middle of the board, would actually work if I cut the wrong side. However, if I was to cut one on one end on one side and the other end on the other side, that board would then be scrapped. I also mark which board is top and which board is bottom as far as how it's oriented in the door, just in case there are any variations that I'm building into this. I don't have to go back and figure out why it doesn't fit until I move the puzzle pieces to the right location. Now that I've got all 4 of them marked, I can take them back to the chop saw and cut the face of that rabbit out. Then we'll move on to the bandsaw and get the other cut made on all of them. Now at the bandsaw, I'm going to get these 4 ends cut out real quick, and we'll get these boards dry fitted and see if we can't get this door finished up. Looks like everything's fitting up as it was supposed to. Take a close look and see. Yeah, that looks like it's plenty good enough for rough sawn lumber. And I'm going to make one last measurement just to make sure that nothing got off in the moving of everything around before we screw it and glue it. Yes, I am playing in the glue with my finger. Yes, I do have a brush somewhere. Just got to locate it at the moment. So I can't lose my finger, so I'm using my finger. I'm attaching to the top of these doors with a metal angle bracket that I fashioned myself out of some flat strap. Forgot to get any video of that. They just have several screw holes to interface with that top 2x6. They're actually a U shape that goes down both sides of that 2x6, and then through bolts. I put 1/4 inch through bolts through that 2x6, and then they've got a slot in the top of them to accept a bolt that hangs out of the bottom of the little wheeled truck that rides in the unistrut that I'm using as the track to hang these doors on. While we're on the subject of forgot to get any video, I forgot to video putting up the track. My original plan was to put them on some 4x4s that I secured to the ceiling joists, but I ended up changing my mind and just fastened them directly to the ceiling joists. Here in the video, you can see I'm ripping a sheet of sheet metal. The doors needed 2 full sheets and a half of a sheet plus 1 inch. So I wasn't able to split a sheet down the middle and use it for 2 doors. I had to rip a sheet and throw almost half a sheet away. Of course, I didn't throw it away, but I used it for other purposes, or will. But here, if you haven't seen my other video on putting sheet metal on the building, I'm just scoring this with a regular old razor knife and then bending it at that score line, and this hardened sheet metal just snaps in two. Here you can see 2 of the door frames hung, ready for sheet metal. I don't know if you can tell in the video for sure. They're hanging on separate tracks, so they're not butting into each other head to head. They will bypass each other, so there's enough room between the tracks to allow the door plus the sheet metal bumps to pass behind the outer door. So I'm putting the 2 full sheets for each door on each end and putting the piece that I cut that has a rougher edge than the factory edge out in the middle where you won't be exposed to it with your hands. So now it's just a matter of getting the sheet metal fastened to the door, putting it on all with some screws, of course. It's a little bit slow trying to hang sheet metal by yourself up and down the ladder and up and down the ladder. But look at there, here comes some help. Now maybe I can get it done a little faster. Putting up sheet metal is kind of like watching paint dry, so I'm not going to put y'all through doing all of it. We'll get this door done and move on to some trim maybe here in just a second, and then we'll do something else. Here's our trim coming in now. I had some angle broke up when I bought my sheet metal to cap the ends of the doors here where the lumber is still exposed to the weather. Not that there'll be all that much weather up under this 6.5 foot overhang on the doors side of the building, but here's a closer look. You can see the left door doesn't have the trim and the right door does. So I started this building about a year ago, and I actually started with having to build the dirt up to put the building on. There's some videos on my channel of doing that, and then of the building being built. If you're interested, you can go check those out. But at the end of this one, I would like to kind of review where I'm at as far as money in this building. This building is 40 long and 20 wide, but the roof is bigger. So on this door side, there's actually almost 7 foot overhang. So starting from the bottom, fuel for the tractor for doing all the dirt work, about $100. 2 loads of gravel, I got $800. Portland cement to mix with some of the gravel to pour my own foundations, another $100. Rebar, $50. The cedar logs to mill the posts out of, I give $350 for. The pine logs that I milled all the lumber for the building out of, I didn't have any money in. Screws, bolts, and fasteners, I got $300. Metal to make brackets to attach the lathing and the trusses, I got $120. The sheet metal for the whole building, the roof, the walls, including the screws and insulation, was $3,000. The doors with the tracks, the closures, sheet metal, and screws was $1,000. So that all in is $5,820. That's what I've got tied up in the 800 square foot building, doing it all myself. I hope you liked the video. Please like, subscribe to the channel, and if you have any comments, drop them and I'll be sure and get back to you.